Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to Esade. My name is Angel Saz-Carranza, professor here of strategy and director of EsadeGeo. And first of all, let me thank our two supporters of our annual meeting, which this year reaches 11th edition. So EsadeGeo has 12 years and a half of existence, and we've practically had this energy meeting each year with slight gaps. So thank you very much to the European Commission, who has been supporting us. We're happy to have hosted many of the colleagues of Ms. Lobillo here. I think all of the European commissioners in energy since we've been here have come through our meeting. So it's something which we are very, very proud of. So Lucas, thank you very much for your support. And Elena, thank you very much for your support as KIC InnoEnergy or EIT InnoEnergy, who has been with us since. So this panel focuses very, very strongly on the subtitle of this year's energy meeting, which is about securing the EU's industrial lead for a future net zero economy. So it's precisely about combining our energy transition efforts with the need of maintaining and growing our industrial competitiveness in Europe. More specifically, we are going to be focusing on the geopolitics of battery supply chains. So in particular, in one of the many dimensions of this energy transition, which is the battery sector, or actually the battery value chain. The idea is that we have a round of presentations by our guests, and thereafter we'll open the floor to the audience for Q&A. We have a wonderful set of speakers, and we've set them out in the following order. Actually, we have 4 speakers, although you only see 3, and that's because one of the speakers, unfortunately, had a very mild, but got COVID on Sunday. So COVID is still out there, although many of us have forgotten about it. So he will be connecting from Lisbon. And our speakers are, we've organized and ordered them in the following logic. So first of all, we're going to have Thore Sekkenes from the European Battery Alliance, the program director of the Battery Alliance. He is also the director of InnoEnergy Scandinavia, an expert in the field of electricity, and a former executive at ABB and Bombardier. And he will start giving us a view of the whole value chain, because as the battery ecosystem, because as the director of the Battery Alliance, he sees the full value chain, and that has been a motto of the Battery Alliance, has been to actually think of developing a battery industrial sector or ecosystem in Europe based on the value chain. Thereafter, we'll have Henry Sanderson, who is many of you might know for his bestseller book called Volt Rush. If you haven't read it, please do so. It's a fun, exciting account of the scramble, the winners and the losers of this new energy transition, and of the whole politics of raw material. He's also right now the executive editor of the benchmark Mineral Intelligence Consulting that provides information and consulting on critical raw materials. So he will then come after Thore, so we'll start up upstream with raw materials. Thereafter, connecting online will be Manuel de Sousa Martins, Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Lithium, which is a lithium producer in Portugal. It's a joint venture. Aurora Lithium is a joint venture between Galp and Northvolt, the famous or the most renowned battery manufacturing in Europe. So that's an interesting venture, and he will be giving us his view also on the production and exploitation of lithium. And finally, Caroline Mini, Head of Sustainability at Verkor, will give us the view from a battery manufacturer. Verkor is a French battery manufacturing startup, which will be right now in the process of creating a battery gigafactory in northern France, and soon to be operating. And she's also a PhD from University of California, Los Angeles. So welcome all of you. Thank you very much for being here. We have 10 minutes for each one of you. So let's start off with the value chain view. Thore, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm Thore Sekkenes. Just a few seconds on who am I and what am I doing and why am I saying these things. This slide shows a little bit about what is the European Battery Alliance. There are essentially three parts to it. I lead the industrial part. That's the part in the middle, the EBA 250. But there is, of course, the governmental part. Thank you. Thank you very much. So there are three parts. There's the industrial part. That's the part I lead. There is the governmental part, a very important part, creating the regulation. These are the member states implementing the regulation, implementing bonus schemes, penalty schemes, and so on. And then there is the whole research and development part, which is the bottom part of this slide. Enough about that. I represent the industrial part, the part here to implement a European battery industry. Next. Status of the value chain. Very important to talk about the whole value chain. We many times focus on the cell manufacturing, but that is only part of it, perhaps the most important part. But we need to talk about the whole value chain, starting from raw materials, active materials, going into the battery manufacturing. And we have one example here beside me. Verkor belongs to that part. Aurora, who we will hear from later, they are in between raw materials and active materials, refining the raw materials. And then we have applications and integration, and at the end, recycling and second life. Now, the status of this value chain. Let's start with the good things. I am very happy with the development when it comes to the cell production sector of the value chain. A lot of initiatives. And this possibly very busy slide is indicating that in the best of worlds, all of the announced initiatives, we will actually meet the demand. The red lines indicate the demand in 2025 and 2030. And the blue columns leading all the way up to them indicates that we have close to self-sufficiency on this. I don't believe this is the whole truth, but that's good news on this part. Also on applications, we have the industry of making packs, of making something out of these cells has proliferated in a very good way. All the OEMs, all the serious OEMs have models out, driven EVs out right now. So that is truly happening. I concur with what Christina is saying. There is no way back. We are in transportation. There is no way back on this end. But where do we have problems? I usually bring up three things. The first one needs to be upstream. This red circle here indicates that in raw materials and in active materials, we are definitely behind. Then I bring up two more things. One is skilled people. To go into this industry, we need to skill and reskill those losing their jobs elsewhere to go into this industry. We need to spend time and effort on this. And the third point I bring up is machinery. most of the production machinery that we use in this industry is made somewhere else. And we can't really say that we are resilient if we don't make our own, if we're not able to make our own tools. That is also something we need to discuss. So that's the status of things. Now, in this context, obviously, I need to mention the IRA. I need to mention competition from China. And this slide, based on the previous one, was made after the IRA was introduced. And you see that the columns have actually come down. And I'm highlighting what is hindering us. When it comes to raw materials, I definitely believe that permitting and the process for permitting, how fast this can be done, is a big problem, which has a knock-on effect on investments. Investors will not put money where they are not where there's not enough transparency, whereas there's not security that there will be some kind of payoff at some point. So permitting is definitely a problem here. The next part, lack of finance, permitting, and also a lot of companies focusing on going somewhere else outside Europe. Very much linked to IRA, but not only IRA. Canada is also putting a lot of subsidies, and there are many other countries putting in very generous subsidy propositions for the companies to take. And then we have the EV adoption, even though I don't think, I've already said, there's no way back, but the EV adoption is actually slowing down a little bit. We need to stop that and increase that introduction. On recycling, a lot of good initiatives, but that part of the industry is very dispersed. There are very many alternative solutions, and we have a problem of losing used material out of Europe. That is something we need to stop, because that will alleviate the raw material situation. Many years from now, it will be alleviating a lot more, but we need to get that industry up and running. And then skills and machinery across the whole board. Now, let's talk about IRA and the implications of that. This slide shows statistics produced by my fellow speaker up here, Benchmark Minerals, and the top row is from March 2022. That means before IRA was put in place. A couple of details from there. The world capacity announced was almost 6 gigawatt hours foreseen for 2031, and Europe was in second place after China. 1 year later, that's the bottom part of the slide, we see, first of all, that the installed capacity foreseen in 2030 is over 9,000 gigawatt hours, so it increases substantially. But the second point is important. Now United States is seen as the second biggest nation, so to say, when it comes to batteries. This is a big change, and it has a lot to do with IRA. This slide too shows investments. The dark blue columns is Europe. And then there is a happening down there, announcement of the IRA, and that impacted on this slide. You can clearly see that the light blue columns going up, that's United States, and where the investments here in Europe have, I wouldn't say stopped, but have slowed down considerably. My last slide. For this reason, what do we do with this situation? We have come up with a number of different proposals that were discussed at the EBA ministerial meeting in Brussels back in March. This slide shows the seven proposals that we have put forward. I would like to say one thing about the IRA. With a world hat on, it's a good thing, but we have to ensure that we stay on our toes now to ensure that Europe stays up front. That's very important. Just a few of the points that we put forward. 7 different actions. The first one, accelerate permitting, and it's evident to everyone why I'm proposing that. We have to still make it sustainably and very transparent, but we need to do it faster. Number 2, expand and simplify and expand the IPCEIs. There are very good tools in place, but let's simplify them and focus them on upscaling and industrializing. They've been a lot focusing on research and development. That needs to continue too, but now let's go in the other direction. 3, prioritize battery value chain for redeploying existing programs. As I said, there are many programs available. Let's deploy them where they are mostly needed. And I think I stopped for the sake of time. I stopped there, but there are 7 concrete actions here that we hope will be implemented to get ourselves as competitive as our competitors. I think I stopped there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sekkenes. Great overview to get the panel going. We turn now to Mr. Sanderson, so to focus more on the upstream part of this value chain and the ecosystem.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'll just talk about 3 things today. One is there will be new winners and losers in this energy transition. 2 is why raw materials are one of the key bottlenecks. And 3, how the West can catch up to China. Just number 1, what we're seeing is climate's become a new area of competition. So the old intrastate competition, we're now seeing climate change front and center of geopolitical competition. And there is no God-given right that the West should have the jobs and technology from clean energy. And it's a competition. We have to be aware of that it's a very difficult competition and not get too complacent. China is the leader in so many clean energy technologies. 90% of the solar supply chain, produces around 90% of rare earth magnets, produces about 90% of the battery anodes, and just a smaller share of battery cathodes, about 80% of lithium-ion batteries. I could go on and on, but the West helped China in so many ways. China's been the biggest beneficiary of globalization ever in history. The biggest Chinese battery company from the very beginning was supported by German automotive company, helped to build them. We gave almost all clean energy technologies were invented in the West. Solar, Bell Labs in the US. So lithium-ion battery in the West. So we've helped China to its current position. So we have to be aware of that. But competing with China is really not easy when they're at shares of 80 to 90%. And I think we have to be aware that the cost, competing on cost is very, very challenging. And that's why we do need policies to help support industries in the West. And this is what the IRA does so beautifully, which is help subsidize the cost difference between manufacturing batteries in the US compared to China, as well as other parts of the supply chain. But we have to really stay the course. This is my fundamental conclusion. We can't give up again. We saw after financial crisis a similar effort in the US to develop green industries that didn't work out. We saw in rare earths a few years ago a lot of concern. But this time we have to have policy certainty and stay the course. And there will be a lot of failures along the way, which is extremely challenging for the US political system. Just on why raw materials will be a key challenge. What we're seeing this decade is we have this exponential increase in EV demand. I'm sure you're all seeing it. And this is a real challenge because we need to produce the minerals, we need to mine the minerals before we can recycle them, a decade hence. So it's this decade and the early 2030s that are a real issue. And money needs to be deployed now to avoid some future challenges. Mining is a very long-term business. We're sort of talking 10 plus years for new mines at a minimum. And what we really see is that lithium is a key challenge because it's a new, it was a relatively small industry before batteries for EVs. So we're seeing a real pressure on the demand side, and we probably need around 100 new lithium mines, this decade out to 2035. So that's why we see predicted shortages out post 2030. It is abundant. It's not an issue about geological abundance. It's an issue of actually investing the money, building a project, and building the processing capabilities. In nickel, it's interesting because, yes, we love to criticize China, but if China hadn't invested 15 billion in nickel in Indonesia, we wouldn't be transitioning to EVs. So we should probably thank them. Western companies have invested very little in nickel. As a result, nickel's set to be quite well supplied this decade, and cobalt as well. Indonesia is now emerging as the second biggest cobalt producer after Democratic Republic of Congo, again, thanks to this Chinese investment. So yes, we do face some shortages, but if you layer on top the geopolitical desire to reduce reliance on China, then you're making the situation even worse. If you're saying you don't want nickel to come from Chinese companies or cobalt to come from Chinese companies, you are creating a huge problem. And that's some of the issues the US has run into, where the aim of the Inflation Reduction Act is to reduce reliance on China, to develop domestic industries. But in nickel, you just can't do it without Indonesia in the timescale you need. So there's a fundamental conflict between the goals of decarbonization that Biden has, the EV goals, and the aim to reduce reliance on China. And this is what we're seeing come to the fore in the US. If you allow nickel from Indonesia, you can produce EVs, but people in the US will say it comes from a Chinese company and it's not very sustainable. So you've got these fundamental tensions going on. If you look longer term, I mean, it's interesting, we're at the early stages of this energy transition. If you look longer term, we're going to need some 300 terawatt hours of batteries. And, we're talking lots and lots of tons of minerals longer term. Of course, technology does change. You do see innovation, etc. But what I would say about innovation is, it's not often the best technology that gets scaled up. And we saw that with solar, where a lot of Western startups went bankrupt because they were focusing on innovative technology, when actually what got scaled up was, multicrystalline silicon solar. So I think the lithium-ion battery is a great technology, and it works in almost all use cases. So while there may be innovation, I kind of feel like it might not be the best technology that gets scaled up. So we may see a situation like this. Just to say also that vehicles have very different raw material requirements. So this is a big issue, which is that consumer choice plays a big part in determining raw material demand. Are we going to choose the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck? It's a pretty cool vehicle, but it needs a lot of nickel. Or, India and Chinese markets, their vehicles are smaller and they don't need no nickel, no cobalt. So do we use the energy transition to rethink mobility, rethink what kind of vehicles we're going to use? That will have a huge impact on raw material demand. Do we just electrify SUVs, or do we take it as an opportunity to reduce the size of vehicles? I think that is very critical. So yeah, just Some concluding remarks. I think we shouldn't overestimate the challenge of competing with China. One thing that they're very good at is lowering prices to crush competition. We saw that in rare earths before, so we do need policy to be there and to stay the course. One of the big concerns about the Inflation Reduction Act is what happens if Trump gets in. What happens to the future. Investors need to see a 10, 15-year time horizon to make sure that they can make the investment. Just echoing on an earlier point, there's no point mining in Europe or anywhere if we're then sending the material to China. So we do need to build a whole supply chain, cathode, anode, midstream processing. It really is a reindustrialization of our economies. We need to build a whole supply chain, which is an extremely big challenge. It also needs to be cost competitive. So those are my points. We can do it, but don't underestimate the challenge of competing with China in many of these areas. Automakers are also facing a wave of Chinese EVs coming to Europe at the same time as they're losing market share in China. So it's extremely challenging condition. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry, for this overview of the upstream sector of the battery ecosystem, and thank you both, Thore and Henry, for being so precise on your time management. Jump a step or a stage in our value chain approach, and we're going to go down to the battery manufacturing. And we are happy to have Caroline Mini with us, who's going to talk about an exciting, very relevant project in the battery manufacturing in Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present Verkor. So I'm Caroline. I'm head of sustainability at Verkor. I work on all sustainability issues inside Verkor, which is the carbon footprint. I work also on traceability of our supply chain. We also work on training. We'll talk more about what we do for training on batteries, and also on recycling. We have recycling experts as part of our teams. So my presentation today will deal with 3 points. The battery demand in the EU, will cover it a little bit earlier, so I will just come back to it quickly and more precisely on battery manufacturing. Also, then what Verkor does to answer the battery demand in the EU. And then finally, the challenges of the supply chain for battery manufacturing. So what it has been said, but quickly to have a quick overview. So the battery demand for lithium-ion battery cell demand will reach 1 terawatt-hour in 2030 due to customer adoption and also the environmental policies. Of course, at the European level, the end of the sales of thermal engines in 2035. So there is the huge increase in lithium-ion battery cells. But there is still a shortage of about 400 to 500 gigawatt-hour. So we can see here that to meet this demand, there has been numerous gigafactories projects that have been announced. A few of them are endorsed by automotive makers. And so we estimate there's going to be around a shortage of 400 to 500 gigawatt-hour of lithium-ion battery cells in Europe. And still, in the same time, in China, there is an excess supply of about 1,100 gigawatt-hour in 2030. So there is a risk that our undersupply may be actually met by an oversupply coming from China. Because as today, China actually represents 2/3 of battery manufacturing. So we have a picture of today in 2022 and 2027. We see that China can represent 2/3 of battery manufacturing capacity. So as the EU is far from being self-sufficient, there is efforts need to be pursued. So we don't meet this demand with actually batteries coming from China. So to answer this demand and this great increase in battery demand, so Verkor was created in 2020. We are based in Grenoble. We are about 300 people today with 40 nationalities. We have a Verkor Innovation Center in Grenoble, which encompasses a pilot line and R&D lab. And we'll have our first gigafactory in Dunkirk. The gigafactory is being built and will start producing batteries in 2025. The gigafactory will be 16 gigawatt hour plant to start in 2025, and will increase to 50 gigawatt hour in 2030. So we have our internal levers of competitiveness we've been developing, which is a digital process and a very optimized process. So we actually minimize scraps, waste manufacturing. We also optimize the energy consumption. We optimize the resource efficiency. So we use the optimized amount of material used for our cells. And so we also work on our carbon footprint. We have a very ambitious goal to reach 30 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour in 2030. This is a 70% decrease compared to actual battery right now that are coming up from China that are more around 100 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So we have experts coming from all over the world that already had done gigafactory in the past. So they're coming with us to Grenoble to build the gigafactory. And also, we have a traceability system. So we can trace the raw materials from the mine up to the battery to understand where different materials are produced, in which working conditions, and we'll make sure that they actually meet all the criteria in terms of environmental, social, and governance. The next, also, we are working on the skills. We've been said that at the beginning. We launched a battery school with other institutions, academics, labs, and companies to train people with the new skills on the battery value chain. So it's all along the value chain. From the upstream part to the downstream part. And also we are also working with equipment manufacturers, because we need equipment manufacturers in Europe to build these gigafactories. And we launched the Upsell Alliance, which is a European alliance of equipment manufacturers for batteries, to help European manufacturers to be able to get the equipments at the scale we need for the gigafactories. And also on the energy side, so to reach this low carbon footprint, we work on the energy supply from low carbon supplies, and also from steam. We use waste steam from a local ecosystem in Dunkirk to be able to reach this low carbon. So we have really a local ecosystem approach where we try really to develop our partners around us locally to build the batteries. But then, of course, so these are pictures of the gigafactories in Grenoble and also in Dunkirk. And as I mentioned, also we're also working on recycling, which recycling is a very important part to secure the volume and the price of raw materials. So we're also working on having a recycling facility next to our gigafactory. So then, challenges on supply chain. So there is still a distortion of competitiveness with the rest of the world, and also regarding the raw material refining. So we can see that actually China doesn't have that much of mining, but of course controls 70% of refining for lithium and cobalt. And then mining comes from lithium, so South America. We have also mining in Africa. And also in Indonesia. So there is a risk of shortage of battery cells in Europe because of the lack of refining. So we really need to localize the refining and conversion facilities, both for a sustainable and local value chain, but also to prepare the recycling of raw materials. Because once we recycle what we call the black mass is like a powder made from the batteries, we need to convert them into battery metals. So that's why refining capacities are really important, both for a sustainable value chain and also for the recycling. So the Critical Raw Material Act is great and is a great advancement and accent on refining. But we need to accelerate and to scale up refining capacities, because the demand in lithium is so high that there is a risk, there is a delay between the demand of lithium and our production capacity for the refined materials. So aside from what has already been proposed, there's a need for more subsidies for the refining capacities and scaling up this kind of project, a need of low carbon supply, and also to relocalize and trace all these refining capacities. So we should ensure also that these raw materials in the framework of the Critical Raw Material Act are traced, and we can verify the source of these materials, so we make sure that there is a sustainable value chain. And second, we also need to make sure that these strategic projects to implement refining capacities in Europe are actually provide secure supply for European players. Because as we've seen, there's going to be a tension on the supply of these refined materials. So that's all for me, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this. So let's take a round of questions while we see whether we can, while our technicians try to connect with Mr. Sousa. So let's open up the floor for our three speakers right now, and hopefully we can have Mr. Sousa join us in a minute. I'm gonna take perhaps the advantage of moderating this conversation. Let me throw a couple of questions out there to our speakers, and perhaps we can have a first round of answers and then move on to the audience. So for Mr. Thore, some of the proposals you are presenting are already, so one of those 7 proposals that you were putting on the table, I am aware that the Commission is already working on them. Some are already included in the different acts being put forward. What would you say is the most relevant proposal which is not right now being considered in the different policy proposals coming out of the Commission? I'll also make the 3 questions in order. For Mr. Sanderson, how credible? So you're essentially telling us that we cannot do a lot of EVs or move towards EV transition and at the same time move away from China. From your experience in China, you've worked there as a reporter for Bloomberg in your past. What is your opinion regarding the possibility of China weaponizing its position right now? How feasible is that? We know it tried to do that back in 2010, 2011 with rare earths when it had a dispute with Japan. That seemed to not work too well. Do you think that's possible? And finally, for Ms. Mini, where is your with your great approach to battery manufacturing? How are you going to compete against Chinese battery manufacturers who have great scope and scale economies, a lot of experience in the field? So perhaps we can start with you, Caroline, if that's okay.
Thank you very much for this question. This is a great question. So we have been developing our own levels of competitiveness. So to be really efficient in our plant in terms of digital, in terms of processes, because we're using a lithium-ion NMC battery cell. So we've been working a lot on everything we can have control in terms of competitiveness. So it means energy supply. So we use low carbon energy supply. We are efficient in our processes, and also in the digital we're using. And so we are at the edge in terms of sustainability, in terms of traceability. We're implementing already a project with Bureau Veritas certification company to understand the sourcing of our raw materials. and also in terms of carbon footprint. So we're working on all the levers to decrease the carbon footprint compared to what has been done right now in China. And of course, there is the battery regulation where sustainability is at the core, and this is a great example of what we can do. And this, we can also incorporate that in other regulation, such as the Critical Raw Material Act. So we make sure that we develop a sustainable value chain. So it's being, you know, at the edge of sustainability and going faster that I think we can actually compete and provide a sustainable and greener battery value chain.
Thank you. Henry?
Yeah, so you asked a really good question about whether China can weaponize. I think the answer is yes, it could. I think we've seen, you know, the US has implemented this very strict ban on chips, right, to China. My feeling is that China, though, sees this clean energy economy as a huge opportunity for their companies, and a lot of Chinese companies want to expand to Europe and be part of the European market. The domestic market is extremely competitive, and they're looking for new markets. So I think they wouldn't necessarily instigate it, but what we always see with China is if they're prodded or pushed, they will always react. And when I lived in China, there was a number of boycotts against, you know, Japanese companies or other companies that had hurt the feelings of the Chinese people, and they will always react in a defensive manner if they feel they've been hurt or insulted. But I think you know, it's interesting, the rare earth ban. Yes, it caused a lot of attention at the time, and we saw Japan help fund a Australian rare earths company, but China's still dominant in rare earths. So even though they did that action, yes, it did accelerate a push to reduce reliance on China, but not completely. So it's also quite thought-provoking. But I do think we're entering very worrying waters, dangerous territory, where, you know, the US is taking this action on chips. Yes, China could take similar actions. I do think you know, they are innovating now, and then you add in artificial intelligence, which is the big unknown is the combination of AI and climate technology, but they're already innovating, and you know, we are catching up to a moving train, but they also want to protect their advantage and their head start. So I couldn't necessarily see them weaponizing it, but I think we're entering uncharted waters.
So maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So your question was to thank you again. To point out which of the proposals I think is most important. And frequently I do the exercise of thinking about if I could fix one thing, get one delayed the Christmas present, and I'm sure about the answer, and that would be getting a transparent, faster, and predictable permitting process. Without a doubt, that is what I would wish for. This would make it much easier for investors. I don't think it's the only thing we need to fix, but it is the one biggest thing. The investors still, or the ones I have contact with at least, are still to some extent sitting too much on the fence, waiting for signals, waiting for comfort that it is a good thing to throw money at something. And here, I think there's a lot of good things going on, just like you said. I think I'm expecting a lot out of this sovereignty fund, but there are other tools to be used as well. I think a lot is about the security and of energy supply, reliable and low-cost energy. If that can be somehow assured or guaranteed, I don't know exactly how. I think that is also a very important point. But first, on the top of my list is definitely permitting.
Just a very quick follow-up question. So with the last year's advancement in in quickening the permitting, and those provisions included in the Net Zero Industrial Act, would that be enough?
As was said earlier today, these acts that have been put on the table, that is the start. If I a little bit further down on my Christmas wish list is now for member state to, I believe the ball is with the member states now, to pick up the ball and start using this direction, this new direction put forward by the EU, which I think has been done very well. I'm very pleased with the regulation that has been implemented or is being implemented on batteries. That's a first of a kind, actually.
Okay, congratulations to Ms. Lobillo for her part in those advancements. So let's open up the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, okay. All right, Mr. Sousa, just in time. So before we open up to the audience, please, we are ready to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I am really apologize because I was struggling with this Zoom. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Esade, for inviting me. So sorry for not being there in person. As Ángel said, so this has been a delayed COVID crisis, so hopefully you can hear the messages I wanted to share with you. So let me try to just share my screen. So I'll do that as of now. Could you just confirm that you are seeing my screen?
We do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, so going to the presentation I would like to share with you today. So basically, I would try to be conscious of time. So I have 2-3 main topics. The first one would be basically trying to give you a little bit of a glimpse of how can we secure this sustainable and secure battery value chain for Europe. Then a little bit of a glimpse of Aurora Lithium. I'm the current CEO of Aurora Lithium and the role it might play in this EU BVC. And then a little bit of the Critical Raw Materials Act, but I think the messages already conveyed are pretty much aligned with my messages here. So first of all, this is a little bit of the how we see it at Aurora, the market unfolding for demand. And this is pretty impressive. This is basically demand, sales driven. And as you see here, by 2040, you will have like 7,000 giga as a total demand in the world. And this is basically coming from EV, as you know, electrical vehicles, but also energy storage and systems. So this is a very steep curve, and this will translate in 6,000, more than almost 7,000 tons of lithium hydroxide. And as you see here, in 2022, 2023, you will only have 800. So you need to multiply this by 10, which is really, really impressive. At this point in time, there is no lithium hydroxide selling in Europe. So we're talking about 2023, and the majority of projects that are being prescribed as we speak basically will be coming online by 2025, 2026. So huge demand and not so much supply to really cope with this demand. China is, and as said, will continue to be the most important market going forward. So this will be followed by EU and by the North Americas. And we have also talked about a little bit of how EU is trying to push the model. It's mostly a model that is targeted at environmental concerns, ESG compliance, driven by CO2 emissions and GHG emissions as a whole. And I must say that US, and you have been talking about this already, so has made a very pragmatical approach, a little bit disguised as IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, but pretty much not tackling inflation at all, because it's pouring money, shipping money into these projects in order to foster climate change, energy transition. And there's lots of projects in the US that are benefiting from, 40, 50% upfront incentives. And so this doesn't relate to any control of inflation. As you said, it's protectionism made in America, trying to really boost the battery value chain and the climate tech businesses in those countries. So just to give you another important note on this, global EVs will represent more than half of vehicle sales worldwide. That's by 2030, which means approximately 14 million units per year. And the European Union will be slightly with 25% of that market share, so meaning 10 million electrical vehicles per year by 2030. This expected EV demand in Europe will require 720 giga of cell production, which means almost 600 lithium hydroxide conversion facility, and there is none at the moment. And as you know, spodumene concentrate and brines are really the feeds to this battery value chain, and current market conditions are really disrupting access to this spodumene concentrate. So players across the entire value chain are pretty much in a race to secure supply, and the current base case feedstock is really not enough to meet demand. So most of the world's lithium is being sourced from South America, Australia. China is the largest lithium refiner globally, especially when it comes to hard rock processing, which is the spodumene concentrate route. It has, as you know, lower wages, more than 2 decades experience in refining, existing infrastructure. There is lots of public support, not very transparent from where I've seen it. It has fast permitting, incentives, grants, not too much ESG requirements. So it is an evident opportunity for Europe and for all of us to try to participate in this growing market and really try to, get into this business to bring more sustainability and more sovereignty to Europe and really secure a battery value chain and energy transition here. So if we move to the other slide, I just wanted to give you, I don't know if already moved. Yeah, so here, as you see, this is pretty much what will be happening in Europe as in terms of gigafactories. So Northvolt, Tesla, CATL, Freyr, and so you have all these companies putting together projects that will be ultimately trying to feed this EV demand, but ultimately we also need feedstock for doing that. So there's where the upstream investments play a very important role. And Iberia is very well positioned to play this role. And as you know, Portugal has the widest proven lithium reserves in Europe. So this is why also Aurora is trying to put together this project. If you take a look into the companies that are really trying to be refining players in Europe, there's 18, that's 18 companies only. So those are the companies that are here. Besides ourselves, Aurora in Portugal, you have Rocktech, AMG, Green Lithium, so 18 companies there. And even if all of these companies see daylight, and they might just not see daylight for a certain number of reasons, even in that case, we will only be able to produce 400,000 tons of lithium, and we will need 630,000 tons of lithium. So this is a very demanding upstream challenge, and Aurora is trying to meet that challenge, and we see ourselves to be a little bit well positioned in order to tackle this, both in terms of permitting, incentives, our track record in terms of shareholder base, but it's going to be a very tough journey going ahead. So some companies will face permitting issues, some others will face some flow sheets issues, technology that it's not mature enough, and other companies will face challenges revolving around byproducts usage and circular economy usage, because we want really to be ESG compliant. So none Some of those will not want to see daylight, and we need all of this to see daylight in order to meet this demand. So going very fast now, this is Aurora. So we have a project 50-50% owned by Northvolt, European champion, and Galp, the largest oil and gas company here in Portugal. So this is our credentials. We think that we have pretty much access to ability to permitting and unlocking social permitting as well, strong balance sheets of our shareholders. We have a qualification process fast track because, as you know, Northvolt is really trying to offtake the majority of our production. And we are engaging with all this bunch of companies. I would just want to highlight, we have awarded FL Schmidt, the biggest calciner in the world, Veolia, the biggest hydromet engineering in the world as well, and Fluor as our major engineering contractor. And we are already making peer review of our flowsheet engineering with Wave International, Woods, reverse engineering, DNV, project controls with Turner & Townsend. So we are pretty much not saving money on the wrong place. And the wrong place to save money would be engineering. So we need to have a proven flowsheet, a de-risked flowsheet, in order to make this happen very, very, very fast. So this is the outlook, how it does look like our future plants that will come online on 2026. This is an investment around 700 million euros. And here I must say that we have been granted under the PRF program from Portugal, 2% of this investment incentivized. So I must say that Europe is not actually acting as we are preaching. So we are putting together a very important project on the BVC arena, and we are only getting 2 to 3% of our investment as a grant, as an incentive. The US, as I said, Albemarle, Piedmont are getting 25, 30, even 40% upfront investment. So this doesn't place us at the same level playing field. But even so, we're doing this investment. We're shooting for a production capacity of 32 kilotons per year that will replace more or less 600 internal engine combustion vehicles per year. So that's a lot, which will give us a lower carbon footprint as well. So this is pretty much our credential. Just to highlight a little bit of the talent, we're trying to bring talent, as much experience as we can. And this is quite important in order to have the most experience with lithium credentials. So we're not relying on just engineers because they are engineers. We are recruiting engineers from Australia, from Canada, from the US that have the lessons learned of building lithium refineries elsewhere. So this is why we're pretty much engaged in trying to do this and accelerate execution with these people. But some of the companies that we are competing with may face, as we are, some problems in recruiting and then retaining this high talent. So this is a little bit of a highlight that I would like to mention as well. Just to finalize this presentation, I'm conscious with time. So on the Raw Materials Act impacts that we may face going forward, I think that has been said. So IRA is putting strong financial funding incentives. So that's almost $400 billion US for climate and energy. Many other companies in the BVC are really moving into the Americas, and scale-ups that form companies that are located in Europe might move to Americas as well if we don't take the same level playing field approach. And companies like Volkswagen, even Northvolt, are making that move into the Americas, which doesn't make too much sense, since we could see, proof that we could build really European champions here. As a response to IRA, I think Critical Raw Materials Act is important. At least 10% of EU's annual consumption of critical raw materials must be met by European mining. And at least 40% of processed minerals might be and need to be processed by EU. So this is important. We are doing our share. So Europe needs 600,000 tons of lithium hydroxide. We'll be delivering more or less 32. So that's 5% of the Aurora's first strain contribution. Just to sum up, so we should look into how can we make this same level playing field with similar incentive schemes, potential local content incorporation, fast permitting, streamlined all permitting procedures, create really an ecosystem that has a social unlocking approach to BTC, because otherwise, you will see other EU players being uncompetitive, and the potential scale-ups will be, or future openings might be elsewhere outside the EU. It will be a shame and a loss of an opportunity. So thank you so much. I'll be, of course, available for any further questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sousa. So perhaps we can open up to the audience and have a round up, collect a few questions for our panelists. Great. So I see some hands up. One over there.
Yeah, hello. Many thanks for your presentation. It was a great, very clarifying and very interesting to see how this is evolving. What I would like to make a couple of statements and perhaps one quick question.
Excuse me, perhaps you can introduce yourselves.
Okay. Javier López Bartolomé. Okay, I come from Spain here, and I have a company with an investor in energy projects. So I think at the beginning of all this process, we were in one side trying to decarbonize the society and in parallel to become independent from the rest of the world. And we have stressed this a lot to everybody. And my question is this going to happen, or is this not going to happen? We are going to be stay dependent from the rest of the world. Because it is my belief that in a global world where everybody collaborates, you can get things faster and better. However, I don't see that when you bring in the table enemies, between brackets, competitors, and we try to do everything ourselves, maybe it's not so easy to move as fast as we need. This is one question. The second question, you mentioned that we may have permission, for example, maybe a key issue in order to move faster. But I guess when you start building a factory, you need to know what you're going to build. And I have heard that many of the components of batteries have to be still designed in Europe for European manufacturing. And therefore, if this is not completed yet, maybe we cannot even start building factories that need to be in 2 years, in 3 years, producing full speed. That's the second point. And I don't want to
Thank you.
perhaps continue with the questions, but I would have more questions.
We have coffee. We have a coffee break for that. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions we might want to collect from the audience? Elena here, second row.
Thank you very much. Just two questions. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for this panel. It has been great. And you have opened up a lot of questions and curiosity. So two of them is, we have talked about the competition about China and competitiveness, which is a key topic today. Just before the IRA, the average European battery pack in comparison with prices was about 8% higher than the US, okay? After the ERA, it is 40% higher in terms of price. So apparently, competing in terms of cost or prices is not going to be the solution for Europe. So my question is how Europe is going to compete with this context? First question. And the second one, we have mentioned that we don't want to fail in the same trap of dependencies, changing some dependencies on others. And we have seen that Mr. Sousa has presented that the good news is that we have capacity in Europe in terms of raw materials, although sometimes we don't like to accept it, but we have raw materials here, and also we have capacity targets in order to support. But there is the other aspect that has to do with diversification, and that is where innovation can play also a role. So what is the status of other chemistries in terms of batteries, like sodium batteries that are using much more common and less dependent raw materials? Thank you.
Thank you. So I have one last question, perhaps for Mr. Sousa. Is how much do you see the NIMBY, not in my backyard phenomenon, affecting you? If you is the critical raw materials act the goal of having high percentages of raw material mining in Europe are realistic, not from a permitting or administrative or political or even economical, but from a social perspective? So let's have a round of replies for these questions. Perhaps we can start with Henry this time.
Yeah, just to answer the question about independence you asked, I think it's interesting the G7 meeting's gone from decoupling to de-risking. I think that's right, which is diversifying. We don't want to have 90% market share in one country. And also just from a climate change point of view, climate change putting pressure on these supply chains through many different means. So we do not want to rely on one single supply chain or one country. So I think we can never have complete independence, but we should de-risk and diversify. I think that's a very, very coherent strategy. On the question on competing on cost for Europe, yes, that's right. The IRA subsidizes battery production in the form of you can get up to $45 kilowatt hour in tax credits. So if batteries are $120 a kilowatt hour, that's quite a significant chunk. So it's very, very difficult to compete with those kind of incentives. But I do think that automotive companies are looking at the world in three big markets: North America, Europe, and China. So they have to have battery manufacturing in Europe. So I think they will help drive the demand and commit to I guess eating some of the cost difference. I do think though cost is a huge problem. We need to get the price of electric vehicles down. That's absolutely fundamental. So we don't have time to play around with localization if it increases the cost, right? We have to get EVs cheaper. So I think that is an issue. Just finally on new technologies, yes, sodium ion is already here, and it's really accelerating in China, where we see some of the biggest players in batteries and cathode and anode moving into sodium ion. For energy storage, it's a very, very good chemistry because you don't care so much about the energy density, you care about the cost and the cyclability. So that can help relieve some of the demand around the edges for lithium ion, for raw materials. We're also seeing Chinese companies use it in electric vehicles. And I do think if you look at big markets like India, like China, they need very, very cheap electric vehicles, especially India. So it could be, let's see how the innovation goes, but it could be a chemistry that works. What also is interesting is mixing chemistries in one EV, one battery pack. So you could have sodium ion and lithium ion, or LFP and NMC. So you look at the statistics, most people just don't drive very far. So yes, I think that's sodium ion is one to watch. And again, my point about innovation, China's already ahead in sodium ion. It used to be that the West would say, well, we'll build the future technologies, but we're not seeing that happen. We're seeing a lot of innovation happen in China on sodium ion. So we need to catch up on that as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sousa, perhaps you want to jump in?
Yes. Thank you for the question. I think, the NIMBY thing on mining and refinery, so not on my backyard. So I would very much like to have energy transition, but I don't like mining nor refinery because it's not good for our country. So it doesn't make any sense at all. So we're losing time. But I also think that we, or players and companies in this ecosystem, should really try to really unlock the social permitting. So here in Aurora, we deal with permitting that revolves around three things: permitting in terms of environmental, industrial, but also social. So we are putting together a kind of environmental and stakeholder steering committee in Setúbal, so the southern part of Lisbon. And we are pretty much prescribing the plant as we speak, but we are already engaging with 100 plus stakeholders in the region in order to explain to them what we are doing, but mostly explain to them what we are not doing. So, and this is quite important because it's kind of a social license to operate. And we all know about Jadar and Serbia and other mining problems around Europe. So lithium mining operations will face some opposition from local communities. They will be concerned about environmental and social impact, but we need to build trust and obtain like this social acceptance. And this will require both an effort from ourselves, the companies, but also from, you know, other stakeholders, the government, the communities as a whole. And we need to demystify a little bit on mining. So there is smart mining. There is no this old-fashioned mining anymore with the miners with their all gray faces and putting tailings and be very low sensitive to CO2 carbon footprint. So smart mining is there with a certain circular economy also there, with reutilization of products, with enhanced recovery of raw materials. So that can and will be possible. And we at Aurora, we're trying to build, you know, not only the largest, which is good, but also the safest and most sustainable lithium converter in Europe. And being most sustainable means that we'll pay for it. So sustainability doesn't come for free. And so we will pay for green energy utilization. We will pay for making our calciner hybrid. We'll pay for having our trucks electric. So this will be more expensive. So that's our share in the big scheme of things. But I think that it goes hand in hand with the regulatory framework from the European Union. But we also need some kind of support from the stakeholders. And I think that some initiatives, just to end my reasoning, so some initiatives that the European Union is putting together, like you know, battery passport initiative, that really traces back everything that it's done in the lithium space, puts us in the same level playing field. So this is good. So we will know that this lithium hydroxide has been produced through responsible sourcing, through this certain content of emissions or GHG content, through this not employing child labor. So this is very, very important in order to be a compliant ESG continent with compliant ESG operators. And some kind of cross-border adjustment mechanism should be put in place as far as we can, because we'll be stuck in the middle in between US and China. And if you don't create this competitiveness and the same level, I think we will struggle a little bit. So it's an effort that we will need to put together as companies, but as a governments and as other stakeholders involved as well.
Thank you. Caroline.
Thank you very much for the questions. I'm just gonna add on top of what has been said. In terms of de-risking diversification, I think it really relates to, of course, we're working on the local supply chain and local value chain here in Europe, but it's also important to onboard our suppliers. It's a collective endeavor to decarbonize our society. And so it means that we need to help and work with our suppliers to be more sustainable. And in this sense, the regulation really helps us, like has been done in the battery regulation proposal and the obligation to declare the carbon footprint and the traceability of materials in the battery passport. This is really important. It helps really for us to explain, communicate with our suppliers and to upskill them, to get them to the next stage and then create a same level playing field. So this is really important, and sustainability is at the core. It has been very well articulated in the battery regulation proposal, and the same can be done on the Net Zero Industrial Act and also on the Critical Raw Material Act. This is important. And then on your question relative to the collective and the collaboration, we need to do it local, create the local ecosystem and work with our partners. So that's why at Verkor, since the beginning, we have 6 co-founders. We have a consortium of industrial leaders to help us. And we're also working with equipment manufacturers, with training organization, institution, academics, to bring everyone on the battery value chain and to bring the skills and to have people here in Europe to work on the battery value chain. So I think this is still a collaboration. So we still believe that collaboration is key to achieve those targets.
Thank you. And then what can I say on top of my very competent fellow speakers here? I think I go back to the first question. Do we want to become completely independent of the rest of the world, putting it to an extreme? I don't think so. It would be naive to think that we would do that in the near future. I definitely underline the need for cooperation. Cooperation is the flavor, not of the day, but of the decade. After that, maybe we compete a little bit more. But cooperation is definitely we want, and we want the knowledge coming from Asia. Let's be honest about that. We have many good Asian companies coming to Europe, and they are welcome in my books. They come here, they create job here, they create value here. This is good. On that question. Then there was from Elena, there was a question of what is, I understood your question being, what is our edge? And I think it's been said many times, we are, at least not now, we are not the low-cost manufacturer, definitely, that will take a very long time. Our edge must be sustainability and circularity. And the ground has been laid with the regulation in place. Now we just need to implement that. We need the battery passport. We need to put that to work so that all the products on European soil, sold and used on European soil, meet those requirements. This providing that level playing field so that everyone here needs to abide by those rules. This is fundamental. Second question from Elena, alternative solutions. Sodium ion, you mentioned it. Now, what is driving sodium ion? Well, it's not performance. Performance is more or less like LFP, give or take. There are some it's about like LFP. And the driver is the raw materials. So what is driving the sodium ion chemical solution forward is actually the need for raw materials. It will not substitute lithium ion. That will not happen in a foreseeable future. So that will not happen, but it will, like Henry said, alleviate the need for batteries. There are many applications that can be used here. And then there is, of course, the holy grail, as many call it, the solid state technology. I'm sure that is coming. There are many, including here in Spain, there is a very good project on exactly that. And I'm sure this is coming. Will this replace everything? No, I don't think so. We are talking about a long period of diversification when it comes to batteries. So there will be space for everyone. There will be applications for all kinds of technology. I'm quite sure of that. And with that, I think I end.
Thank you, Thore. But please join me in thanking our speakers for their time and their great time.